Welcome everyone to this webinar titled Doing Research in El Salvador, Bridging the Research Gap and Improving Development Policies. I'm Francesco Bino, I work at the Global Development Network. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. I'll just run through a couple of very quick housekeeping remarks for all of you who are joining us today. You'll see there's no chat box, but there is a Q&A button at the bottom right of the screen. Please use the Q&A to ask any questions to the panel. And we also have simultaneous interpretation between English and Spanish, Castellano. So please, if you'd like to follow a specific language and not both, please click on the interpretation button again at the bottom right of your screen on the Zoom window and select your preferred language. For any question, just contact us in the Q&A or probably in the chat box. I think you can write to our IT team in the chat box. But without further ado, I'd like to ask Pierre Jacquet, who's the president of GDN, to welcome all of you. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesco, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. It's late afternoon here in Paris for me. My name is Pierre Jacquet. I am the president of the Global Development Network, GDN, a public international organization headquartered in India, in New Delhi, whose mission is to support high-quality development research conducted in the South, and to connect this research with national and global policy debates and with policy elaboration. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you, all speakers to this panel, all participants to this webinar. The webinar is organized to launch the Doing Research Assessment, the DRAs. You will hear much about DRAs today for El Salvador. This is an exercise conducted as part of GDN's Doing Research program, which I think is a unique, innovative initiative to systematically examine and describe the way development research ecosystems are organized and work in various countries. We believe that this is key to promote the role of research for policy, to install an evidence-based policy culture, and to understand how to best direct efforts at building research capacity. So this DR program, Doing Research program, consists in producing Doing Research Assessment, the famous DRAs, on the basis of a common methodology that allows comparison across countries, a methodology that was established by GDN after a pilot exercise funded by many donors, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, the French Development Agency, and this was pursued by several exercises within countries funded by other donor partners. El Salvador is the fourth Spanish-speaking country in the American continent, included in the Doing Research program, the others being Peru, Bolivia, and Paraguay. And there were two full Doing Research assessments completed for that region, one for Bolivia, and now this one for El Salvador. The DRA for El Salvador was organized through a partnership between GDN and FUSADES, whom you know is an internationally reputed think tank in El Salvador. And this is a very exemplary of the way GDN conceives of its mission. Our role is not to do the research work ourselves. We are not a think tank. It is not either to solely fund the work done by others. It is to empower and facilitate, to provide research-based services that can vary depending on the nature of the partnerships. And these services may include funding, methodology, monitoring, organization, mentoring, quality control, peer review, seminars, webinars, dissemination, publication, and so on. In this case, we are very happy to have partnered with FUSADES, and FUSADES also contributed to the funding of the exercise and applied the methodology developed under the GDN Doing Research program. The DRA was mentored by Thomas Bossert from Harvard University, and the principal investigator, the PI, was Helga. Hello, Helga Quella Marcelli, a well-respected education researcher. It is her second participation as a team leader in a GDN program, and we are very happy that this has been such a fruitful cooperation. I wish to thank Helga and FUSADES for this cooperation, Thomas Bossert from our mentor, the DR team of GDN under the leadership of Francesco Obino, GDN's head of programs, all those who made this webinar possible, the translator, interpreters, and it's always a difficult exercise to interpret in real time, and that allows us to have these two languages of French and Spanish for this launch. And of course, all the participants in the webinar. I wish all of us a very successful launch of the DRA and successful discussion. And Francesco, now back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Just for those who just connected, you can choose the language. We have simultaneous interpretation throughout the webinar. Just choose, press the interpretation button at the bottom right of your screen, and you can choose the English, not French, the English and the Spanish channels, as you wish. Now I'd like to invite Mathieu Denis, who's the acting CEO of the International Science Council and Director of Science there as well, to give some opening remarks. Thanks, Mathieu, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Thank you very much, Pierre and colleagues. It's a real pleasure to be here, so to speak, to be with you. At least in this Zoom meeting. I must say I have a very special personal interest in this discussion today. As Francesco just indicated, I am the acting CEO of an organization called the International Science Council, which prides itself to be the global voice for science. And the reason for that is that the ISC is the world's largest international representative science organization. It's a membership-based organization. It's a federation of scientific organizations, which counts essentially two types of members. On the one hand, you have national and regional members, such as academies, national scientific academies. And we have such members in about over 140 countries worldwide. The second type of members are the professional international disciplinary unions and associations, so the professional organization representing a discipline at the global level. And we have about 42, 43 now, I think, disciplines represented in the ISC, in the council, covering a very large spectrum, as you can imagine, going from natural to social and human sciences. Now, El Salvador is a member of the International Science Council via its ministry, or its vice ministry for science and technology. And as a matter of fact, until 2019, El Salvador hosted the ISC Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. As I said, colleagues, the International Science Council brings together the natural, the social, and the human sciences at the national and at the international level. And one of our mandates is to work towards the equal advancement of science system in all parts of the world. Now, to do this, as you can imagine, requires a special emphasis on the social sciences. Advancing the equal development of science systems around the world, apart from a few richer countries, actually means tackling the specific challenge of advancing the development of social sciences in particular. It means developing other disciplines and other types of knowledge production system, yes, but there's, in most countries, a specific challenge relating to the development of social sciences. it would be very difficult, colleagues, to overstate the importance of strengthening social science capacities to help societies everywhere addressing national, regional, and global challenges. Why am I saying this? Well, you know, take a country like El Salvador or Canada, where I come from. There is barely no challenge, no issues confronting societies in those countries that would not require a critical input from social scientists. Take COVID as an example. You know, if one of the lessons learned from COVID around the world is that in countries that have focused their response primarily or overwhelmingly on knowledge coming from the medical or the epidemiological sciences, have performed less well. There were real shortcomings in responses coming from those countries than from countries that have from the beginning tried and combine epidemiological knowledge with knowledge coming from the social sciences, from the humanities as well, you know, referring to or taking into considerations people's values, people's beliefs, people's understanding of illness and of death, for example. This is a general conclusion. I'm not referring to El Salvador in particular. This is a general conclusion that we've seen around the world, hence the importance of social sciences. But, you know, the same can be said of our responses to climate change, for example. You know, the main issue, if you take climate change, the main issue at the moment is not so much to continue measuring, you know, climate change and, you know, how many degrees, et cetera, et cetera. No matter how important that is, obviously, so that research will continue. It's important, it's critical. But the main challenge in climate change, now that we know that climate change is there and is with us to stay, the main challenge is about policy changes. It's about changes of behaviors from the people, from the business community. It's about social transformations that every single report on climate change says is at the core now of our, needs to be at the core, I should say, of our responses to climate change. So, colleagues, advancing a country's social science capacity is absolutely critical. And what is true at the level of a country is equally true at the global level. If you take my organization, the International Science Council, we are partnering with several United Nations agencies. As a matter of fact, we have a mandate to mobilize interdisciplinary scientific expertise from different areas, different disciplines, and from all parts of the world. And we have this mandate to do that on all sorts of you know, issues, challenges, and policy processes, such as, you know, the SDGs, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, et cetera, et cetera. Why are these offices and UN bodies coming to us and asking and wanting to collaborate with us? Well, quite often, what they're lacking is expertise about social trends, societal responses, people's values, et cetera, in countries that are, you know, less represented in the global scientific community. It's not only that, but this is a critical gap in most of the processes and in most of the multilateral system agencies that we're working with. This is what they find interesting in a platform like the ISC, is that we bring everybody together. So we must develop social science capacity in several parts of the world, in most parts of the world. To develop, we need metrics, we need baselines, we need evidence. This is why the work of GDN is so critically important. And you will be presented today with the results of GDN's evaluation of social science capacity in El Salvador. Now, I've experienced for myself how the publication of GDN's report in other countries in the past often trigger national discussions on science system and on the importance of social sciences. Personally, I think that the GDN reports are particularly helpful and insightful when they manage to help convince the relevant communities, that would include the broader public, policy community, the scientific community, the social science community, convince those relevant communities of the importance of having an integrated vision of the development of the science system. In other words, stopping the siloed approach of the development of science system, which consists in saying we need to develop, mathematics, we need to develop engineering, we need to develop this and that. Rather, having an integrated approach, that is the key today. But in having and in promoting an integrated understanding of the development of the science system, paying particular attention or consider seriously the specific importance of developing social science capacity. This was essentially the few thoughts I wanted to share with you. So with that, back to you, Francesca.
Thank you very much, Matt, for this really encouraging thoughts. And I think this is the time just to give the floor to the team of FUSADES. So Helga, of course, has been the principal investigator for this study, along with the rest of the team, Alejandro and Crisia, to tell us what is it that they found out when they looked at the state of the social sciences in El Salvador. Helga, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, Francesco.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Crisia, can you please start the presentation? First of all, I would like to say that at FUSADES, we are honored to be able to share with you the findings of the research of social sciences in El Salvador. And this, we have done it with Dr. Thomas Bossert and our team at FUSADES. Our expectation is that this work will contribute to understand much better what are the challenges of social sciences research in developing countries such as El Salvador, and to help us to think what is it that we can do and to incorporate local research as a key input for the debate of sustainable development policies. I am going to start explaining according to the agenda that we have. Crisia, if you can continue with the slides, please. We are going to be presenting what is the objective of the work that we have conducted and what is the method created by GDN to be able to do the assessment of social science research, so that you have an idea of the scope, its reasoning, and the criteria that we have used to do this analysis. After that, we are going to comment how we apply this methodology to assess the Salvadoran case, and we will provide the main findings. I would like to tell you that for this presentation, and because of time, we have only selected the findings that we have thought of greater importance, but you can find greater detail on the report of the Doing Research Assessment that has been published in English and in Spanish, and is available on the GDN and FUSADES web pages. After that, based on the findings of the assessment, we will provide some recommendations to strengthen the social science research approach, the quality of the products, and how this can contribute the policy-making debate in El Salvador. And we will finalize this presentation with a reflection that we hope is going to be an invitation to find viable and sustainable ways so that developing countries such as El Salvador, social sciences will be reevaluated and can contribute with relevant support so that development public policies are really based on evidence and can provide the basics for local needs. Following the order of my presentation, I will explain the objective and the methodology that we have used. The study that we carried out is framed within the project Doing Research Assessment, or known as DRA, and is trying to assess what are determinants of research in developing countries. DRA project, according to the SDG agenda. It is within this framework that this DRA starts, is to be able to solve the issues that are affecting the livelihoods of the people and the quality of life and the challenges in development. It is necessary that social science is going to be quality and to be able to inform public debate and also policymakers. And social science research needs to be strengthened in the countries of the South. And to accomplish this, it is extremely important to have adequate metrics that will measure the development and the performance of social science research to be able to know what are the barriers and also to shed a light on how to improve them. Before launching the DRA project, 11 pilot projects were conducted in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and these were going to be input to be able to assess the methodology, to be able to assess research systems in Latin America. And based on that methodology, Paraguay, Peru, Bolivia, and Venezuela have been countries where these projects have been developed, but El Salvador is the one that is after the pilot and the testing of the methodology. And this is according to the assessment of the other countries that are mapped in the slide. The doing research assessment is to assess the context where social science research is carried out, and this is part of the objective. Go on to the next slide, please. And what this is about is to be able to identify the systemic barriers and opportunities for development with regards to three main functions, and that is the production of research, dissemination and use in public policies. The analysis of these three functions is based that to have good research goes beyond the use of skills of just applying scientific knowledge. And also, scientific research is dependent upon several factors: socioeconomic context, political context, history, access to knowledge networks, support policies, and also the features of the market for the production and the use of research. So considering the foregoing, the objective of social science research is to generate knowledge that will provide the guidance to academia, policymakers, and donors on their efforts to promote the production and dissemination of quality research, and that can contribute to have informed and evidence-based public policies for development. I would like to explain to you how we applied the methodology to the Salvadoran case.
Se ha hecho en otros países, pero esto incluye su adaptación.
Now, the methodology was used as it was applied in other countries, but in case it was necessary, I will explain the methodology. The DRA methodology has 3 steps to analyze the factors influencing the performance of social sciences in a country. The first of them is express analysis of the economic, political, historical, and international context for research. The second step is carrying out a stakeholder mapping, identifying who produces and who uses research to better understand the power relationships among the stakeholders and the roles that they perform in the research system. The third step is an evaluation of the functions and processes of the research system based on 54 indicators. Now, these could be used for comparisons between countries at a later point. Now, overall, this methodology uses different information sources to complete these steps, such as expert review, interviews with experts, interviews users and producers of knowledge, and also forming focus groups to explore issues of interest. And here on the slide, you can see the number of people that were actually, we worked with, we actually interviewed to get the information in the report. But as in any investigation, we ran into limitations and challenges. Now, to start, the definition of social sciences can vary in different contexts. And this limits the possibility of comparison, precise comparison between data in El Salvador and other countries measured. For instance, the number of researchers in social science. We also ran into incomplete and information that was not updated in terms of the number and type of research in the country, their characteristics. So we were not able to establish a size of a population for the study and take a representative sample of that universe. So the population that was surveyed is not really a representative sample of the universe of social science researchers in El Salvador. So we cannot make generalizations based on the findings of from this information. However, despite this difficulty, we are convinced that this analysis that we've carried out is exploratory in nature. It has, it reveals great insights, and it is a good first approach to to look at the performance of the research done in this country. Now, this investigation, let me tell you, was a real challenge, I confess. This is a first experience in El Salvador, first time in El Salvador where information is consolidated about social sciences, applying a rigorous evaluation methodology that was tested in other countries. Now, I know you're very anxious to learn about the results of the evaluation of the social science research system in El Salvador. So I would like to give the floor to Alejandro Flores to present the main findings of the evaluation. Thank you very much, Doctor. As she mentioned, because of the limited time, we've selected the most relevant findings to share with you, but other findings, very interesting findings you can find if you look at the full document, which is already available in both English and Spanish on the GDN webpage. So also before getting into the findings, I'd like to say that we've organized them according to the three functions of the social science research system that we've been studying. So this is production, dissemination, and usage of the information. So in this sense, we start with production. Through our research, we found El Salvador has been relatively effective in developing basic capacities for social science research. And we could identify this because in the context analysis and the stakeholder mapping we found, there is a sector dedicated to this activity with a diverse set of stakeholders, higher education, government, civil society, just a whole plethora of institutions involved in social science research. However, we found, despite the diversity, there's a concentration of researchers, individuals, and institutions in the capital of the country. And researchers are also concentrated in higher education, not the whole diversity of institutions that actually are out there and that do social science research. In addition, we found that social science research faces limitations in its execution. One of them is restriction in terms of access to information. And access to information includes cases where information just doesn't exist. I mean, definitely doesn't exist or there are areas of social sciences, specific social science topic, where there is just not enough figures, or the figures are not updated. It also could be that the information or studies may exist, but they are not available to the public. An institution created a study, has not made it available to the general public. And this and other aspects limit access to this information and data, which would be the basis for generating new knowledge and performing research. Now, another difficulty that researchers that we interviewed talked about in our focus groups and in the surveys, they talked about the actual time dedicated to research. For instance, researchers working in higher education often have to split their time, not just in research, but also to teaching or administrative activities, which in the end means that the actual time for research as such is much less, much smaller. So this influences the amount in terms of amount of production and the quality of the research produced. We also found deficiency in the training, the human resources dedicated to social science research in a country. And this often is a result of the gaps identified in the national curriculum. There needs to, we need to strengthen the competencies needed for research. I mean, curriculum can be very well focused in terms of concepts and technical knowledge of the specialty. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of doing research, often there's no particular subject where they study this in the curriculum. Another limitation, which also affects different aspects of the activity, is a very little investment in the country in research and development. So here on our screen, we're sharing a comparison between El Salvador and other countries in the region that are comparable, and this is from the study. In El Salvador, for instance, in 2018, only 0.1% of the GDP was invested in R&D. When we look at Bolivia, which is another country that worked the DRA project worked, it's also in the Latin America region. It's cataloged as a mid-income, mid-low income country, just like El Salvador. They actually dedicated 0.2% to research R&D in 2019. And then Costa Rica, which is a country that is described as medium to high income. Well, El Salvador is medium to low, but it's closer to El Salvador. They invest 0.5% in R&D. So what's the common characteristic between Bolivia and Costa Rica? It is that they invest more in R&D, and they also have a greater number of scientific publications every year in those two countries. So you can see a correlation where more investment corresponds to a higher output in research. Now, another decisive challenge for production is the weak culture of social research in our country. We identified this weakness because, as I mentioned, during our research, we had focus groups and interviews, and the stakeholders who were involved in research, they themselves were very unclear whether a social science research system existed at all in the country. Besides, the researchers that were surveyed considered that there is no culture around peer review, that there's little training, that research development support services were also insufficient. In general, they considered that the country, in general, does not really value research, and it's not, this really influences the demand and supply for products, outputs, research outputs. One of our participants was quoted here, and she said, in her view, she says, the country doesn't have the research vision for me. I mean, we don't have the culture of making decisions based on research. So research has a very weak role. And she's talking about policy development in a country. Another important aspect that was highlighted in our study is that the relationships between the different stakeholders in, or that should be in, a social science research system in the country is generally limited. They're limited to specific cases. So they're like just like a moment in time. There's no space for systemic and long-term sharing of ideas and output, which would in the long term generate an identification that there's belonging in a whole system of social science research, which consolidate the system as such. Going to the next function in the system, which is dissemination, research dissemination, we found that effective communication in social science in terms of creating conscience, awareness is very limited. And we found that the lack of the limited resources makes it a situation such that sharing among social science researchers is easier than sharing with the public in general. So once you have an output of a study and you decide to share it with other stakeholders, share it with the public, it's easier that its language is understandable and reach audiences that have something to do with research, social science research. However, for the general public and individuals who are not technically trained, don't have the same social science study level, it's very hard for them to be able to understand the research as written and shared. So the challenges we found to be able to see this barrier, the way we identified this barrier, we found that social science research have a hard time sharing their findings in easily understandable language, reader-friendly language for people who may not have the same studies, level of studies in social science research and who don't understand the very technical concepts. We also understand that there's no relation in the communication channels that the researchers themselves use in disseminating their output and the communication channels that the population uses. So they're unable to actually find the research output. For instance, we interviewed the researchers and we asked them what were the channels they had used in the last 3 years to disseminate and share their research. And we have to say that less than 50% of the respondents said that they had used any of the channels that we're sharing with you on the screen. That's TV, radio, blogs, or the press. That's less than 50% of the researchers use these channels of communication. In addition, we can see that these channels, TV, radio, blogs, internet, and print media, and first of all, internet, blogs, and radio. These are the number one activities that they use, those who do use them. We reviewed the El Salvador Vice Ministry for Science and Technology publication, which was a survey on discussion of science and technology in the country. And this study showed that the channels that the general public uses most to get information about research are really TV and internet. So with this information in mind and comparing it with the results of our study of the researchers, we can see how there's a little bit of coincidence in internet. Internet is used by researchers and by the population, but not TV. It's the one that researchers use the least, but it's one of the most used by the population. So we see that there's a lack of complete correspondence between the channels of communication used by both stakeholders to be able to share and inform the result of research. So moving on, in finishing with the third function, which is the usage of research. Well, the available evidence that we collected in our work, the available evidence is not conclusive about the extent to which the results of research are reflected in public policies. Really, we were not able to come to any definitive conclusion. Now, findings do suggest that there are very few researchers who actually work collaboratively with policymakers. In addition, evidence is used very little in policy making. So to illustrate this, we have one of the results up on the screen from our study, and we asked them about the frequency of interaction between researchers and public policymakers. And here we can see that practically half, that's 48%, stated they never have interactions with public policymakers. So that is evidence of a complete disconnect between the two types of stakeholders. So based on these findings and results, we, within the framework of our study, we've generated some recommendations for the system so that social science research has a more important role in formulating development policies. So to be able to do this, I'm going to give the floor to Cristian Hernandez, who will share these recommendations with you. Thank you. I just wanted to remind you, as mentioned before,
we have concentrated on the main findings, and the main recommendations are the ones that are going to be presented, but you can find greater detail on the country report. With regards to the quality of knowledge production, we recommend to strengthen information systems and to ensure access to reliable and updated data. This is the responsibility of the government institutions. However, we consider that from academia, we can, for example, find partnerships or affiliation to working networks that do collaborative work at the national level or looking towards the international community. And why? To debate and to generate knowledge. This implies the exchange on producers as such, and also on producers and potential users. At the same time, we need to increase the opportunities for continuous capacity building and training on research methodology for the academia, and this is something that is still lacking in the Salvadoran case. So this recommendation particularly implies that from the policymakers, there should be programs where institutions are going to allocate funds for this objective in particular, but also the researchers acknowledge the relevance of developing these skills even though when they are doing research in their profession, and also to bring talent into this area, we need to increase the efforts of identifying university students with research skills to strengthen their capacities and to include them, for example, on internship or fellowship programs on entities that do that. If this is something that is not done currently, we still believe that this can be leveraged to be able to have the gains of that vital capital that we are missing to be able to develop the sector. And finally, we also recommend to strengthen cooperation, management units and management projects units at the research centers to look for opportunities to build capacity, as I said before, as well as to look how to insert ourselves into the international scientific community and research community. According to the governance and culture of the research system, we need to see how CONACYT can take on a much more active role on the promotion and development of social sciences. This could be done through the facilitation of initiatives that will gather researchers and that will provide spaces for academic sharing. We could also promote the creation of a national network of NGOs that will allow for the identification and the sense of ownership into the research of a social science, and this particularly geared towards linking or trying to match the fact that right now research is being done only on some sectors. We also need to have institutional support on a campaign for standardizing social science research and the relevance for the country. And this means allocating funds for creating public awareness, debate, and civic activism, and also acknowledgement of the actors on their belonging to the system so that they themselves are going to be the drivers of a culture of research. Now, with regards to the effective disclosure of research, we need to modify the education that is formal and non-formal supply to be able to improve the capabilities of oral and written disclosure. It is recommended and it is possible to include them into the continuous training of academia. So in this sense, we would be recommending that they focus on topics such as abilities for writing and effective communication on the one hand, and on the other hand, on use of tools and communication means that are traditional and non-traditional, and also acknowledging the importance of how to promote social science research. We recommend the allocation of institutional resources, be it from the public sector and the private sector, to be able to develop capacities and to carry out activities that are specifically destined for the disclosure of the results. All of these efforts mean to have direct investment on education, on training, and time. And this means investment in time and also the tools to be able to promote the findings. Also, to make the most of the communication tools that already exist for the communication of the findings, operative results, and also to translate them into a language that is understanding, that it is simple to be able to reach the public as a whole. So that is why we need to broaden the scope on private, public institutions, users, and producers of research to be able to involve more people, a greater audience, and therefore have greater advocacy on this topic. And we also need to make the most of work relationships to be able to improve communication of the results and successful practices included. On the intensive use of social research in policies, we recommend the academia to make the connections, relevance, and importance of the studies that they are carrying out with particular a link to public policies and the improvement of processes, of activities and projects Likewise, to focus the efforts of research in filling the gaps of knowledge that exist that are going to have a potential impact on the population and the development of the country. And I would like to stress out that the idea is to link specifically what is it that I'm working as a researcher and the effect that it has on public policies, on the people, the trainers, research centers, and the individuals are recommended to train academia to be able to have thorough research, and at the same time that they're going to have material of communicating their findings to the general audience and the policymakers particularly. To what I've said before, we recommend to have a mechanism that will increase credibility and the advocacy in policies from the researchers, for example, working together with other entities, be it national or international entities that are going to be potential users or specialized parties in the area of study. And finally, we need to strengthen the advocacy capacity of the institutions that carry out research, not only the researchers. This means to contemplate within the strategy of the institutional communication a work route that is going to find a link of research with public policies and also the approach into different audiences. Given everything that we have presented so far, we are now going to provide a final reflection, and I give back the floor to Dr. Helga. Thank you, Crisia. So we have gone quite quickly on the main findings and the recommendations of the study, and I would like to do this final reflection. I would like to say that this assessment of social sciences in El Salvador needs to be seen as a starting point to identify aspects that can be studied in greater length and are going to allow us to find better ways to improve the quality of the production of scientific knowledge and also the disclosure and the use of the results of social science research on the development of policies in El Salvador. And in El Salvador, given the lack of leadership and a framework for scientific and technological development in the country, it is difficult to see that the actors who are the researchers, they need to do a much more proactive role in the development of social science research. That is, it is an invitation for those researchers need to highlight the contribution of social sciences in finding proposals for solving social issues and to generate greater confidence on research processes and also the independence of the results. And finally, I would like to say that in El Salvador, as in many countries, as in many developing countries, it is important to do greater research how regulatory frameworks, national organizations for science and technologies, and the systems for awarding sciences frameworks to have solid and strengthened and capable social science research to be able to improve the quality of lives of people through public policies. And to wrap up, I would just like to remind you that on GDN's website and FUSADES website, you can find the report both in English and Spanish. That is the cover of both documents. And I would like to show my appreciation and a call out to the research team in FUSADES. I would like to show the list because all of these people have made it possible to conduct this work, and I am very happy to be able to coordinate with them. And if you have any comments or suggestions related to the report that we are launching today, you can send your comments or suggestions to my email, hcuellar@fusades.org. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to the Team. Thank you, Helga. Thank you, Alejandro. And thank you, Christian, for the presentation. I think it was a shorter, you said it was a condensed presentation of the results, but already there's plenty to discuss. And I think the fact that a lot of the information, well, you mentioned that a lot of information is the data on the level of activity of social scientists in the country is actually hard to identify and find. I think that in itself is a very telling fact. We invited a number of people to react to the presentation, to the report. And I'd like to start with Tom Bossert from Harvard University, who's been the mentor and the advisor to the team throughout the last 18 months. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us, couldn't connect, but he sent a short video, and I'd like to ask our IT team to please play it for us.
Hello, I'm Tom Bossert. I'm the director of the International Health Systems Program at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I'm very sorry I'm not able to attend this important seminar on the work that was done for the Global Development Network by FUSADES on social science research in El Salvador. I was very pleased to be asked to be a mentor for this work that they were doing. I have had a long period of history with FUSADES doing work on decentralization and on health systems reforms. And I've been very impressed with their professionalism and multidisciplinary teams that have been able to carry out very sophisticated research in the areas that I have worked with them on, and especially in this particular research on the capacities in El Salvador for doing social science research. Compared to many other countries, the work that's being done by FUSADES team, I have always found to be of the highest professional capacity. And I'm very pleased to have been able to work with them and to make minor comments on the work that they have been doing. They found a lot of strong and important work being done in El Salvador, but overall, there were limited capacities and limited resources available for the social sciences in the country. That is not surprising for a country with its own limited economic capacity and with small cadres of professionals. However, this report should be able to be used for advocacy within El Salvador and elsewhere to build more capacity in the social sciences and to encourage policymakers to utilize the findings of this study for making better evidence-based decisions about what should be done, and to strengthen the capacity to do better social science research. And I think this study will have a contribution in El Salvador itself, but also as a model in the Global Development Network for doing more of this kind of work, good, careful social science research about social science that should be quite useful in the future. So although I'm not going to be able to attend, I hope to hear the results of this seminar and hope to continue to be involved with FUSADES and with the Global Development Network. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the IT team for playing this video. I think I'd like to emphasize this idea of the need for evidence. And what we're pushing for, really, the agenda of this whole program is to generate evidence in order to be better able to support transformation in the science system, and making sure that social science is a part of that reflection. I'd like to move now to our the two discussants who managed to join us live. I'd like to start with Maria Ballerin, who is a senior researcher at GRADE in Peru, who has also been is an old friend of GDN and has been in fact involved in the Duration program in the past, which means that she has done this and similar kind of exercises on Peru, but also other countries in the region. Maria, can you give us your comments and your reaction to this report and to the presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. Voy a hablar en castellano para honrar a la región.
Thank you, Francesco. I am going to speak in Spanish to honor the region. First of all, I would like to congratulate Helga and the FUSADES team for the work that has been thorough, comprehensive, complete, and is providing a very accurate overview of how research is being done in El Salvador, the context, the framework, and how research practices are being done, the experience of the researchers, and all the things that they have to do to be able to conduct research, and also the relevance and the input of research. And I would like to say that these are the countries of the region, because this work is showing that echoes in different degrees what we find in other studies, other reports on social science research in the region. I've known firsthand the echoes that this has generated, especially the report that we did on the inception phase of the Doing Research program on Peru, Bolivia, and Paraguay, where we carried out an exploration study within the framework of the program. What the work of FUSADES is describing in a very precise and detailed way, it is an adverse context for social science research, and I think it is typical for low to medium income countries. I think we need to compare it with maybe Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, that have different structures. But I think for the rest of the countries, there are many things that we can acknowledge ourselves in the study of FUSADES, and I think that is quite an interesting thing. I would like to highlight some of the similar points and then maybe address some questions or comments from this study. On the one hand, I think that we find regulatory frameworks that have a very limited vision of sciences, focused on their idea of science and technology to improve productivity and economic development, but very restricted, and in which the hard sciences have predominance. We understand the relevance of the sciences that can contribute with the idea of improving productivity and development. And that is a model that has been like the framework for science and technology in many of the countries of the region for the past 20 years, I think, when you see an effort to promote science and technology, this very restricted point of view. Another common point, there's a lack of funding to research, even where there's a greater allocation. Social sciences are not included, or they include them very lightly. This is a very common point. And on the other hand, I think it is also interesting, this other common point, which is on how they are hesitant on providing the relevance to social science research. I was hearing at the beginning that they were discussing about the relevance of social science research within the context of the pandemic. This has been much more clear, but many of the countries of medium to low income, the relevance of social sciences for them is not so clear. And it is interesting because there's a tension that on the one hand, you perceive that social sciences are too much of a critical point of view, and so therefore risky. I remember somebody I interviewed from Science and Technology Department, they said specifically, social sciences are perceived as radical, that history of being radical in policymaking, how social sciences are associated to it. But at the same time, social sciences are perceived as non-relevant, or that the relevance is not understood, not too thorough, especially when compared to hard sciences where science and technology departments are focused in. And I think this is common among the region. And this is the point of view of look at them risky, non-relevant, not thorough enough. That is interesting. It is also interesting to see how the study is looking at the adversity within the context of where the research on social sciences is being conducted. And this grows in the context of greater authoritarian context, the rejection of civil society criticism. And this could have, I think, a common baseline for many countries in the region. We hear a discourse of anti-consultant, anti-civil society, and that is the way from civil society how we conduct research on context without programmatic public sourcing. And I think that is a baseline that we find in common. And this took us to thinking how to institutionalize social science research. Sometimes these are rigid and they're old-fashioned or obsolete point of view of science on how to produce knowledge, and they're looking for promoting it, following only bureaucratic models and only limit the growth of knowledge. These are ways of not including other groups. This is excluding other many inputs, and this is providing a very limited point of view on institutions that are dedicated to the policy making on the practices of research. So this adversity, this poor support that is being given to social sciences is based on this type of ways of understanding science. Also to think about the risk of providing an institution to social sciences, because maybe providing an institutional point of view is going to put too many controls and make it bureaucratic. Also, frequently, this is focused only on the research of universities and not acknowledging civil society research. And I think you have been able to provide a good mapping of the actors. So we find a contradiction, a context where we would like for social sciences to become an institution, but to make them institution, this needs to be mechanisms that are going to leverage and not limit what already exists. And the last point that I would like to mention, and that it came up from the reading of the work, and is the idea of selling social sciences, its relevance, that these are used to resolve problems. Yes, all sciences and all knowledge needs to have an approach into the resolution of problems and to have an importance on that. Nobody's against that, but it's not only to resolve issues, but also to identify them and to present them. We are taking the risk of having a social science that is going to only answer to certain agendas of the policymakers. That is not what we want. And also, social sciences, how they respond with solutions are going to be on the generation and allocation of ideas, on the imaginarium of the people, on the policymakers, on the decision makers. And through it, it rarely happens. And so what can we do? It looks as though the responsible people of science and technology do not know the value of social sciences. How can we understand the role of social science and how this can be relevant to public policies? This is something that we need to work on. This is what I want to say, and I think The report is a very important contribution in thinking on how to promote social science research. Thank you.
Debate on whether social sciences should be answered, should help us answer questions, or in fact ask questions. I think it's absolutely central. I'd like to give the floor now to Pablo Zoido, who's an education specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank, for his own reactions from where you stand, from the way you work in the region, from a multilateral institution like the bank.
Muchísimas gracias, Francesco. Y lo primero que quiero hacer es agradecer a GDN por la invitación.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank GDN for the invitation. Pleasure to be in this event and be able to share with you our reflections in something so important for the region, really, particularly now. COVID makes it so important to reinvest in the region, in human capital, reinvest at all levels, particularly in this crucial element for the economic growth of the region, for its social development. It's very good news that stronger light is being shed on these issues and they're being given more importance. I'd like to share my reflections in terms of the report and also what has been said today, and take advantage that I'm the last speaker, and after what was mentioned by Maria, I also want to say that I want to emphasize that this is my view is external, and I hope that I can contribute something, and I hope that what I can contribute is a little bit more optimism than what Maria shared with us. So I wanted to talk about two areas, focusing first on the strengths of the El Salvador academic community and the studies, the research that they do. I really think that this report has identified in a very good way. I'm going to point out the things that I agree with, and I'd like to compliment the things that were not in the report. For instance, the report mentions that it's a small community of researchers, but I think that it's a really strong community. In fact, Tom underscored this for FUSADES, and I congratulate the different organizations in El Salvador. The report also points out that it's a very diverse community, and I think that this is something of value in and of itself, and something that two things that are important to highlight, and they're not in the report, that most of the members of the research community in El Salvador are from El Salvador. They're Salvadorans. This is very important, and it's also something that you don't see in all countries involved in the region. And so I think this needs to be highlighted. But it's not alone. There's so much collaboration with researchers throughout the region, outside the region, with organizations, and of course, there's always a lack of financing. We could always do more research. We always need to work together. But in El Salvador in particular, there are many active researchers. There is financing by international agencies, foundations, so many stakeholders that are supporting research in the country, and by the government of El Salvador, which has promoted recent initiatives for more innovation and more research and development. And something that I thought was lacking is that it's not only an active, diverse, rigorous academic community, but they're also independent in most cases. I think that this is something that needs to be said. It's a very important asset for the community of El Salvador, and I think that the recommendations that are made most valid, very valid, and very important also to keep these strengths and keep the independence from the policymakers and decision makers in the country. In terms of growth areas, I believe I want to point out one that I consider as fundamental, which is what the report calls coordination between the different stakeholders. And this has implications both for the stakeholders in the country and the community, the academic community. I think it is, a little uncoordinated, and there are opportunities there that have not been taken advantage of that could enhance collaboration, particularly with external stakeholders. There's a fundamental role to play, which is an unclear what the leadership is. Leadership is unclear, and that is in the report. Clearly, there also needs to be public sector leadership role. It's fundamental. And in this sense, I think this is one of the areas, most important areas for growth. It's reflected, for instance, in the fact that I think that there are enough data. There are enough figures. There are many efforts to generate data in El Salvador. What's missing is more integration and easier access to the data that already exists and the usage. Talking about scholarships and more efforts to promote research, particularly share like repositories in a transparent way, in a way that is relatively easy and cost effective. And I would also like to point out the fact mentioned in the need for more support for youth. I think there is a lot of talent in El Salvador that are not only being trained in El Salvador, they also train outside of El Salvador, and then they have the opportunity to return. We need to support them with scholarship, mentorship, etc., internships, etc. So I would also like to disagree with Maria. I'm sorry. I believe that the focus on communication is key. I think that there needs to be a culture of evaluation, a stronger culture of evaluation, which is mentioned in the report, but in part this has to do with focusing on solutions here. And I want to conclude with this. An important conclusion, something that I really missed in the report, I didn't see in the report, is more interest in collaboration with the ministries, not just with decision makers, not just with politicians, but go to the highest level, but also try to institutionalize the daily work with the ministries. Generate teams in the ministries that can generate this demand, not necessarily doing the whole production of research per se, but ask for the research, ask for data in a systematic, institutionalized way, which already is in many of our Latin American countries. Marietta pointed out that many of the Latin American countries are already much more advanced in this respect. Peru, for example, and their teams and generation of this capacity in certain administrations, in Ministry of Education, for instance, or the social services. And this has helped very much to generate in the ministries a demand and the capacity to understand and use the studies and research for policies and for interventions. And I think that there's a lot left to be done in El Salvador in this regard. So I would encourage you to focus on this and not so much communication with politicians.
Team, I think the fact that you have disagreement already, I think is a good sign. Right? I mean, one of the main objectives of publishing something like this report is actually to stir debate, right? And the moment we connect beautiful brains together to think about this structural issues in research capacity, I think we've already achieved something very useful. Now, we don't have too much time for discussion, unfortunately, but I'd like to go back to you, Helga, Alejandro, and Crisia, to get your reaction to these reactions. And perhaps you in reacting, you can also address the two questions we have in the Q&A, which are overlapped to a large extent, right? People are interested to know the so what question, right? We produce the report, we got the data, we know it's the first time it happened, so it's important in itself. Now, how is this going to be used, and who should be using it from your point of view? One angle we really try to push through the program, and we always work through local teams who understand, of course, and know their own country much better than us, is to make sure we focus on what we call levers of change, right? On identifying things that, according to the analysis, so according to the evidence that exists, can accelerate change that often is already happening. Yeah. So I'd like to go back to you, Helga, Christian, and Alejandro, and ask you to address comments and make a concluding remarks before we wrap up the webinar.
Gracias, Francesco. En realidad estoy muy...
Thank you, Francesco. Very happy with the number of comments. Maria, Pablo, and Tom, their comments on the work in general, and also the question that I see in the Q&A about what's the main barrier in the country. We have presented this output on 3 occasions to professionals in the field, and I'll talk about one thing that I want to insist on, and as a team we insist on, is that it can, as Pablo says, we have a smallish but strong research sector that has demonstrated a lot of capacity. However, the issue that we see is that the culture around research is still fragile. And the same stakeholders who are involved in research do not feel that they are part of a social science research system. They are not aware that their action and their research already makes them part of a system. So their perception is a little bit abstract of what a social science research system is, and they think it's somebody else that it needs to bring it about, when actually what we consider is that it's the stakeholder, the actors need to be more aware of their own role in the system of social science research. That makes it possible for the system to exist in concrete ways. Ways like capacity for research, capacity to share research, establish networks and repositories, as Pablo's mentioned, and also to be able to, well, not to just sit and wait for decision makers to come to them. Go knock on the doors of the ministries. Hey, here, I'm offering you this output that I have. So I think it really depends a lot on the capacity of being proactive, and also the comment that Dennis made at the beginning that has a lot to do with the actors themselves. So I think here, what we have is the biggest limitation. The others are practical, but if we don't begin by the fact that the researchers themselves need to believe in their work, acknowledge the importance, and be the ones in charge of sharing the science, then it really is going to work. And on the other hand, there needs to be a more honest dissemination, what Maria was talking about in terms of the contributions social sciences can make, integrated with hard science. I mean, we know we have hard science, natural science, social science, but somehow they're all connected to solve concrete problems. Climate change, for instance, is one of them that mixes all 3, and we can find different situations. So the bottom line is that we're thinking about a context for the development of sciences that's more integrated and more inclusive, as she herself pointed out, where the multidisciplinary aspect and holistic aspects are acknowledged, which is what's required to solve specific human problems. So I'd like to just end here. I don't know if one of my colleagues would like to add something, or Francesco, do you have another question?
No, I'd like to ask, in fact, Alejandro and Christian to come in if you want to add anything.
Sí, yo solo quisiera, muchas gracias.
Sure, I would just like to thank you very much, emphasize the issue of the culture of research. One of the obstacles, greatest obstacles for generating output in terms of quantity, in terms of quality in the country, because the culture of research it contains a series of obstacles that don't allow us to strengthen it. So in the context of our work, you can see the disconnect between the academic world and the general population. They see research as something abstract, something that generates prestige, but you don't really understand it, among other things. So that we see that at all levels. I'm talking about the Salvadoran on the street, all the way up to decision makers. But I think that if that aspect is going to improve, then that will allow better understanding of the importance of social science for this. It can contribute to this concrete, development issue or some issue, and I can understand it better and what I can use it for. And that also allows us to strengthen the whole issue of curriculum, strengthen the research capacity, even at the most basic levels in basic education and higher education too. Not just contributing to the technical side of research, but also the capacity to disseminate research, which in the end is also a positive part of the cycle that needs to be strengthened to also strengthen the culture of research and also at the level of decision makers, if we can improve this whole issue of culture. And I'm not just talking about decision makers in public policy, I'm talking about decision makers in the institutions themselves. If we can get them to understand the importance of research, then the priorities, institutional priorities in the country will change and will give research more importance. And then more resources will be invested, not just public research, but private research invested in research, improving the capacity of researchers, increasing the output and the quality of research, as was mentioned before. So I think that this issue is one of the main issues that we need to work on, because it's a cultural issue. It's not something that's going to change from one day to the next. It's going to take time. And this is also related to the next steps that are going to be taken after this research, which is a starting point that we're already taking in El Salvador, as the doctor said, which is to disseminate the results of this, the output of this study with other actors, stakeholders in the country, and to be able to generate debate and to be able to put this issue on the table so that joint decisions are made of what can be done in our own foxholes to improve research in the country. So this is a great task. It's going to take time because it's about culture, but we think it's fundamental, and it's worth it because it'll have very good results for the country in the future.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Cristian, did you want to add anything?
Quizás hacer énfasis en
Maybe I would just like to underscore what was already mentioned by both Alejandro and the doctor. I think that the main lever for change has a lot to do with this part of the culture, and maybe also underscore the part of training, acknowledge that we're part of a system, that our work is not isolated in each institution. Rather, we are all, or whether we all have a common objective, which is to contribute to the development of the country. On the same lines, this should also be part of our, feel that it's also our responsibility to share what we are doing. And we need to be part of generating the awareness that social science is important. And that means sharing the output, sharing the results, and in particular, linking this to people's daily lives. What does it have to do? XYZ study, what does it have to do with the person who is working in an X place? So if they include recommendation ABC in my report, in my research, that will have an effect in this whole set of people. So I think making these connections is very important to be able to reinforce the role of researchers.
Thank you, Cristian. And we're coming to the end of our webinar, but I'd like to address one of the questions that Leandro actually put in one of the comments that Leandro put in the Q&A, it's true that the marginalization or the lesser importance given to social sciences is absolutely not unique to southern countries, however we want to call them, so-called developing countries, etc. I think we're seeing in the last decade how social sciences have been under attack, and funding for social sciences has been under attack in some of the most sophisticated globally science research systems. Now, the difference, of course, is that those systems are sophisticated enough to have a very lively scholarship and discussions about the system itself. So you already have this kind of data and evidence available about how the social sciences is structured, about the performance. Of course, all this is in part contentious, but you have a debate on those aspects. And this is where this is the very rationale of the Doing Research Global Initiative, is it to generate some evidence at the level of the systems, also across the so-called global south, so that we can have those discussions, debates, and disagreements as well in countries which don't have yet the most sophisticated research funded system. This is really, why we're here and why we are pursuing this report. And I think the work that FUSADES, the team, did in Salvador is just amazing. And I think all the congratulations are absolutely well deserved. I'd like just to close to thank again, of course, FUSADES, the team, all the people who joined us to participate, of course, Mathieu Denis, Pierre Jacquet, our discussants, Tom Bossert, Marie Valerin, Pablo Zoido, and all of you who have joined us today. The recording of the webinar will be online, and please visit the website to download the report in English and Spanish. Stay connected, and see you at the launch of the next Doing Research Assessment. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.